Tonight's news, breaking through the wall. A momentous day in East Germany as the government opens all borders with the West. Battleground. The First Ministers' Conference at Ottawa turns into a wrangle over both the economy and Meech Lake.
The CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
Good evening. On a normal news night, we would be starting with the coverage of the First Ministers' Conference in Ottawa and today's bitter battles over the Meech Lake Accord. Well, that will come later because this is not a normal night. There is astonishing news from East Germany. We are witnessing the end of an era. After 28 years, the East German government is throwing open its borders to the West, turning the Berlin Wall into a relic of the Cold War and possibly opening a whole new page in European history. Philip Winslow reports from Berlin.
In total disbelief, Berliners began gathering on both sides of the wall at the famous checkpoint Charlie and other crossing points after the bombshell announcement in East Berlin. The news that East Germany was opening its borders for the first time since 1961 stunned the world, and Berliners most of all.
I don't believe it.
Politburo member Günter Schabowski dropped the news at an evening press conference.
Also Privatreisen nach dem Ausland können ohne Vorliegen.
Private trips can be applied for without giving reasons, and the police have been given orders to issue permits immediately. Thus, there is no longer any need to leave East Germany through a third country. East Germans are free to cross all East German border checkpoints, including those into West Berlin.
It was the most dramatic news yet in a week of breathtaking change in the Soviet Union's hardline ally. Earlier, communist bosses announced that a party conference will be held next month, the first conference since 1956. Party leader Egon Krenz called for a new law to guarantee long-awaited free elections. He also said the opposition group New Forum is now legal.
I'm more optimistic. I believe him because Egon Krenz we need all peoples now. Nobody can go out more. We have problems in all systems in the GDR. And we must make free elections.
Parliament will convene next week to approve the reform-minded Hans Modrow as new prime minister and to elect a cabinet. Opening the borders was a last-ditch, desperate attempt by the Communist Party to staunch the massive exodus of refugees. 200,000 people so far this year, about 1% of the population. In the West German Bundestag, the news brought thunderous applause, and across Germany, the reaction ranged from downright jubilation to cautious hope that one day Germany might again be united. As one West German taxi driver said, "I think this is a good time for us."
Unless East Germany has a hidden agenda, this historic announcement marks the beginning of the end of the Berlin Wall, the grim monument that has divided East and West for nearly 3 decades. Philip Winslow, CTV News at Checkpoint Charlie in West Berlin.
After hearing the news, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl called for a meeting with East German leader Egon Krenz. Kohl is visiting Poland, but said he may have to end the trip early because of what he described as the dramatic situation at home. And in Washington, U.S. President George Bush said that the Berlin Wall now has very little relevance. That formidable wall that cuts through Berlin is just a small part of the structure that separates the two Germanys. The barrier that divides the city is 45 kilometers long, but the barbed wire and armed guards are all along the 1,400-kilometer border between East and West. It's a physical as well as an emotional barrier. But it's all open now. The Berlin Wall was built in 1961, erected to stop a flood of emigrants. 28 years later, it's being opened up to do the same thing. Roger Smith looks back at the short but celebrated history of the Berlin Wall.
The Soviet tanks that occupied half of Berlin at the end of the war were a sign that Europe would be split in two. It was Churchill who put a name to that division.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
As the Soviets tightened their grip on Eastern Europe, Berlin became the focus of the fight between two systems. In 1948, the Soviets tried to starve the Western Allies out of their half of Berlin. Airlifts brought in supplies to keep the city alive. 13 years later, the Soviets laid down bricks and barbed wire to stop refugees from flooding west. They still tried to escape. Sometimes they made it. Too often they were shot down. The Berlin Wall became the most formidable symbol of the Iron Curtain and of the West's crusade to contain communism.
Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
5 presidents later, and still the challenge to tear down the wall.
Come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
2 months ago, Hungary snipped the barbed wire along its border and allowed thousands of East Germans to flee west. Even then, it seemed inconceivable that the wall itself would be breached so quickly. Of all the stunning changes throughout the East Bloc, perhaps nothing symbolizes the changing face of post-war Europe as much as the opening of the Berlin Wall. Roger Smith, CTV News, London.
For a reaction to today's startling news from East Germany, I spoke earlier with John Halstead, a former Canadian ambassador to West Germany, and asked whether he thought today's actions would stem the flow of East Germans leaving the country.
That's the big question and the big gamble that the East German regime has now embarked on. It's to be seen whether they can convince their people with this sort of gesture that they are serious about democratic reform.